What's up champs, Synthwave here. I recently got a PlayStation 2, and you know what that means, right? I now have a lot more reviews to make, and I will never be free. The first game I've decided to cover from this system is Criterion Games' Black, the over-the-top first-person shooter released in 2006. It's a game I didn't even know existed, until I saw a video on it by a friend of the channel, Mr. Hammers, and I thought to myself, hey, that looks fun. And yeah, it was pretty fun. When Black hit the scene in 2006, it exploded into the first-person shooter landscape like a shotgun through a fragile door. Loud, brutal, and unapologetic. This was a time when the FPS genre was already populated by heavyweights like Call of Duty, Medal of Honor, and Halo, all bringing their own spin on military realism or sci-fi epicness. Criterion Games, hailed for the Burnout series, had already proven they understood one thing: chaos is fun. With Burnout, they gave gamers adrenaline-fueled car crashes that felt visceral and thrilling. So when Criterion announced that their next project could be an FPS, expectations were naturally high. But what exactly could a studio known for insane vehicular carnage bring to a genre already dominated by polished military shooters? The answer was simple: even more destruction. Criterion approached Black the same way they approached Burnout, by focusing on making the game feel impactful. In a genre where players had already spent years mowing down Nazis, aliens, and terrorists, Black needed to stand out by doing something different. So Criterion went back to the basics. They made the guns the true stars of the show. In interviews leading up to the game's release, Criterion's developers talked about their obsession with firearms and gun mechanics. They wanted every shot, every reload, and every explosion to feel heavy and satisfying. To them, it wasn't enough to just have a wide array of weapons. Each one needed to deliver an experience. The way a gun sounds when you pull the trigger, the weight it seems to carry in your hands, the way grenades and chunks of concrete and debris flying through the air. All of these were carefully crafted to make players not just see the action, but felt it in their bones. What Black really nailed was turning the environment into a weapon. Unlike other shooters at the time, where walls were largely indestructible cover, Black encouraged you to think bigger. Enemy behind a barricade? Don't bother peeking out for a headshot. Just blow the whole thing to smithereens. Criterion introduced a new level of destructibility that was, for the time, jaw-dropping. Whether it was shooting out windows, blasting through walls, or detonating cars for maximum collateral damage, Black made sure you were leaving behind a war zone, and not just a trail of dead enemies. This was a game that understood the pure, mindless joy of seeing things explode, crumble, and shatter in response to your actions. The developers didn't want players to just engage with enemies. They wanted players to engage with the world itself. And boy, does it feel good when a well-placed grenade doesn't just take out an enemy, instead taking out an entire section of a building with them. Criterion unabashedly described the game as a love letter to firearms, often referring to the game's design as gun porn. Now, this term might sound a bit absurd, and let's be honest, it is. But it perfectly encapsulates their approach. The guns in Black weren't just tools of destruction, they were the main event. The attention to detail in how each weapon handled, how it sounded, how it felt to reload. These weren't just afterthoughts, they were the core pillars of design. The sound design, in particular, was revolutionary. Each gun had a distinct crack, bang, or thud depending on its caliber, and the environmental audio was perfectly calibrated to make sure you didn't just hear the echo of a gunshot, you felt the shockwave. Headphones on? Great, because Black was designed to rattle your eardrums with explosions that make it sound like your living room was on the front line. Black wasn't here to compete with the other shooters, it was just here to blow you away. Black's mantra, if it had one, would be something along the lines of why solve problems with a suppressor if you have a SPAS 12. The gameplay is a symphony of explosions, gunfire, and debris, with every mechanic tuned to make the player feel like an unstoppable force of destruction. Criterion Games didn't just want to make a shooter, they wanted to make a game where each bullet had the same weight as a car crash. The result? A game where gunfights are less tactical engagements and more open-air demolition projects. From the moment you press start on the main menu, one thing becomes clear: Black isn't interested in making you wait for the good stuff. There's no slow build-up to action, no tutorial where you spend 5 minutes learning how to crouch. Instead, you're handed a firearm and pointed in the direction of the nearest thing that can be blown to smithereens. The gunplay in Black is, for lack of a better term, the entire point of the game. Criterion's obsession with making firearms feel like mechanical gods in your hands pays off, because shooting in this game feels incredible. Every weapon in the game is designed to not just look and sound authentic, but to be a tactile experience. Firing your gun in Black isn't just a matter of clicking a button. Instead, it's a full-on sensory overload. Your ears will ring from the gunfire, your screen will shake from the recoil, and your heart might even skip a beat as the enemies in front of you are vaporized in a cloud of concrete, dust, and shrapnel. If Black had a second mantra, it would be, is something on your way? Just destroy it. The game turns environmental destruction into a core gameplay mechanic. Criterion essentially asked, what if everything could explode? Even if it didn't make any logical sense. it's still incredibly satisfying. Cover isn't just something you hide behind, it's something you blow apart when enemies are foolish enough to use it. Those wooden crates the bad guys are crouching behind, gone in a single shotgun blast. That building they're sniping from, one well-placed RPG, and they're suddenly out in the open with a lot less real estate. The game practically begs you to stop thinking tactically and start thinking with explosives. One of the joys of the game is how destructible everything feels. Black wasn't content to simply have pretty environments. It wanted those environments to be your playground of destruction, whether it's concrete columns crumbling, windows shattering, or entire walls disintegrating. Everything in Black feels fragile in the face of your overwhelming firepower. Black doesn't mess around with inventory management either. Your main job is to shoot, reload, shoot again, and blow something up. You're given access to assault rifles, shotguns, SMGs, sniper rifles, and plenty of explosives. Each of these firearms are animated in fine detail, along with some stellar sound design to boot. The developers were even kind enough to artificially inflate the amount of bullets in every weapon's magazine. An AK-47 holds 60 rounds, a G36 holds 70, and the MP5 holds an eye-watering 80. This wasn't done out of realism, but purely out of player comfort. Shooting is the main focal point behind Black, and the unrealistic magazine size is just another way to let players fire off as many bullets as humanly possible. The game's pacing is relentless, keeping you always on the move with waves of enemies around every corner. But here's where Black may show its age just a bit. The AI, bless its digital heart, isn't exactly what you'd call intelligent. It's like the enemies of Black went to the Stormtrooper School of Combat, where running directly into gunfire and hiding behind explosive barrels are perfectly valid strategies. Enemies are a mix of generic grunts, heavily armored guys with shotguns, and guys who carry a bulletproof shield. They'll swarm you in waves, often trying to overwhelm you by sheer numbers rather than strategic prowess. Sure, they might try to flank you occasionally, but more often than not, their strategy boils down to charge in and hope for the best. Black didn't need revolutionary AI, however. The enemies exist to make sure you never run out of things to shoot, and as long as they're blowing up real good, they're doing their job. The game's story revolves around Jack Kellar, but let's be real, it's not the story you're here for. This isn't Metal Gear Solid, folks, it's not even Call of Duty. The plot serves as a backdrop to justify the endless mayhem and provides just enough context. You play a Sergeant First Class Jack Kellar, a man so grizzled that even his morning coffee probably tastes like gunpowder. And the story? Well, it's there. It's not going to win any awards, but it does just enough to justify why you're spending hours blowing everything up. He's a classic tough guy military type, and we never really see his face, because much like a good action hero, he is not here for chit-chat or emotional growth. He's here to blow stuff up, take down terrorists, and growl commands in a voice so gravelly it could sandpaper a table. At the start of the game, Kellar is being interrogated by a higher-up at the Division, because naturally, he's gotten himself into a bit of a sticky situation. The story is told in flashbacks, as Kellar recounts his previous missions, all of which are dripping with intrigue, explosions, and a body count high enough to make even John Wick raise an eyebrow. The interrogator has all the personality of an Excel spreadsheet, but serves to nudge the story along and remind Kellar and the player that things have gone seriously sideways. Kellar is on the hunt for a terrorist named Lennox, a former CIA operative who went rogue, and now operates in a moral grey area. Lennox has been playing both sides, running guns to the bad guys, organizing nefarious plots, and generally being a pain in the US military's backside. Naturally, this doesn't sit well with the US government, who's sending Kellar to bring Lennox down and stop whatever dastardly plan he's cooking up. As Kellar recounts his missions, it becomes clear that everything isn't as simple as it seems. The flashbacks reveal that Kellar's Black Ops team had been dispatched across Eastern Europe to dismantle a terrorist organization called the Seventh Wave. This group isn't your run-of-the-mill bad guys either. They're heavily armed, well organized, and have an alarming amount of explosives. The game starts off with Kellar arriving in the interrogation room after having killed Lennox. The interrogator gives him an ultimatum: cooperate or face life in prison. Kellar initially refuses, but changes his mind at the last moment, before starting to tell the tale of Seventh Wave. 4 days earlier, Kellar is in Viblensk City, blasting his way through numerous masked assailants. Once he makes his way up the street, he tags along with Bravo Squad in order to chase the suspected leaders of the terror cell. Kellar tells his interrogator that the fourth leader of Seventh Wave was actually an American, which then takes us to Mission 2, Tredesca border crossing. This mission features a silenced pistol and some pretty rudimentary stealth. Luckily, you can instantly ignore it as soon as you get your hands onto an AK-47. After making his way through the forest, Kellar arrives at the border crossing checkpoint and makes sure to blow up as much of it as physically possible. Once I make it to the rendezvous, I get ambushed by a large group of hostiles, but easily deal with them as Kellar has one of the strongest cases of main character syndrome I've ever seen. Once I deal with the stragglers, I meet up with McCarver and head to Nazun town. We're only there for a few seconds before we start taking fire from a sniper, and once I deal with him, I use their own gear against them and use it to up the population of the graveyard, before moving further in, doing it again, and making my way into a sewer system to get into the center of town. Once there, I build us a few buildings and make it to a tunnel next, which leads us to the Nazran Foundry, We're here to sabotage some machinery in order to throw a wrench in Synthwave's arms productions. I blast my way through the outskirts of the foundry and make my way through a minefield by strategically blowing up a majority of the mines. And once I make my way into the facility, I blow both the weapon production machinery and the smelters before getting out of dodge. Mission 5 sends us to Tivlis Asylum, where Valencio, one of the 4 leaders, is hiding out. And yeah, you get the fucking gist of it by now. Shooty shoot, bang bang. Blow up a building, the plot is about as deep as a puddle, but the gameplay delivers in spades. I gain entrance to the asylum, and shoot my way through several levels of it, before dealing with Valencia's guards and capturing him. The next cutscene reveals that Kellar tortured Valencio for intel, even threatening his family at one point. Kellar says McCarver was the one who greenlit the next mission, but the interrogator reveals that they'd actually been acting of their own accord since the foundry, as McCarver never briefed command about it, and that she has also been under investigation. Mission 6 takes us to Vratska Dockyard, where we encounter much more resistance than initially anticipated, causing Kellar's squad to try and link up with the second team. However, once we get to their position, it is revealed they're long dead. The last 2 missions take place right after one another, with Kellar, McCarver, and Solomon teaming up to take down Lennox for good. Part 1 is Grozny Bridge, which is the shortest level by far, aside from the short intro level at least. It's a relentless struggle as you battle your way for inches of progress at a time, as there's barely any cover on the bridge, and the enemies have dug in deep. Once we cross the bridge, we gain access to the gulag. Kellar says he could almost taste Lennox's blood, as he was closest than anyone else had ever gotten. We blast into the gulag, head inside, and make our way into the underground complex, taking out anyone that stands in our way, before finally making it to Lennox's bunker. After killing enough faceless mercs, and throwing about a dozen grenades into it, it gets blown to smithereens, and Lennox along with it. However, the interrogator reveals that Kellar did everything they expected him to do, and now his actions have made it so that Congress won't look twice at the Division's next move. The interrogator reveals that Lennox was never actually killed at the bunker, and that Kellar will help the Division take down Lennox, once and for all. Of course, this all sets up a sequel that we never quite got. Now, there was a spiritual successor to Black that came out quite a way back, developed by many of the same people that worked on this game, but I can review body count in only 3 words. Save your money. So, is the story of Black a mind-bending, multi-layered narrative experience? No, not even close. But that's not what you signed up for. The plot serves its purpose. It gives you a reason to go from point A to point B, while providing plenty of justification for the sheer amount of carnage you're causing along the way. It's not Shakespeare, but who needs that when you're packing an M249 and a bag full of grenades? At the end of the day, the story does what it needs to do. It sets the stage for non-stop, heart-pounding action, and gives you just enough intrigue to keep pulling the trigger. When Black hit the shelves in 2006, critics, players, and even a few startled pigeons reacted to the spectacle in various ways. Some loved it, some were a bit confused. But if there's one thing almost everyone agreed on, it's that the gunplay in Black was phenomenal. Calling the game gunplay wasn't just some marketing buzzword Criterion cooked up, it was practically the review headline. The guns weren't just weapons, they were the stars. Everything from the sound design to the way they felt in your virtual hands was tuned to perfection, and critics couldn't stop talking about it. IGN said that Black had the best gunplay of any first-person shooter on the PS2 or Xbox. They praised the way every weapon felt like it had a real-world kick to it, and the audio design made every shot echo in your brain long after you put down the controller. GameSpot noted that Black's weapons were like finely tuned instruments of destruction, which is probably the first and only time the phrase finely tuned has been used to describe a shotgun that can blow apart an entire wall. This wasn't just a run-of-the-mill shooter. This was a game that put its guns front and center, polished them to a high shine, and said, forget the plot, just listen to how satisfying this rifle sounds. However, not everything about Black earned a standing ovation. One of the most common criticisms, the story. Or rather, the lack of it. I've not exactly been subtle about it either. While Black wasn't exactly aiming to be Citizen Kane, even the most trigger-happy of critics couldn't help but notice that the narrative was, well, thin. Edge magazine referred to Black's story as serviceable at best, which is a polite way of saying, we're not here for the plot, but sure, thanks for trying. The flashback storytelling and the interrogation room framing device felt like they were tacked on just to explain why you're blowing up half of Eastern Europe. One Up was a little bit more direct, calling the plot forgettable. In fact, they even went as far as to say that the game's story almost felt like an afterthought. The cutscenes were few and far between, and most of the dialogue felt like it was scribbled down on a cocktail napkin. Another sticking point for criticism was the game's linear structure. Now, this wasn't exactly surprising. Black wasn't trying to be an open-world sandbox, but it did mean that once you played through the campaign, there wasn't much else to do. While levels were visually impressive and full of destruction, they're also fairly straightforward. You're always funneled to the next objective, which sometimes makes the game feel like one long corridor of chaos. Despite some criticisms, Black found its place in the pantheon of true cult classics. Sure, it didn't reinvent the wheel, but it offered something FPS fans hadn't quite seen before, a game that truly felt explosive. Critics may have dinged it for its lack of multiplayer and story depth, but they couldn't deny the sheer fun of the core experience. In the year since its release, Black has maintained a cult following, especially among players who fondly remember its groundbreaking approach to destruction. And even today, when you hear people talk about Black, It's usually with a gleam in their eye and a wistful sigh about how good their guns felt. In conclusion, Black was a game that didn't try to be everything for everyone, but what it did try to be, it absolutely nailed. It was loud, it was chaotic, and it was more fun than it had any right to be. There may have been gripes, but in the end, Black left its mark. 8 Kalashnikovs out of 10. Hey there, thanks so much for watching to the end of this video. If you enjoyed, leave a like, a comment, and subscribe, as I have 291 more reviews to make between now and the inevitable heat of the universe. Follow me on Twitter and join the Discord. I've been Xeniverse, and I'll be back with more videos real soon.